This is Basic AtariAge, this podcast.
This is Antic, the Atari 8-Bit podcast. I'm Kevin Savitz. James Hugard was co-founder of Neanderthal Computer Things, a company that created just one product. 810 Turbo was a hardware conversion board for the Atari 810 disk drive that promised true double-density storage and faster data reading and writing. The device, released in 1983, could be installed inside your 810 disk drive with no jumpers, no soldering, no extra box. It cost $295. James wrote the firmware for the device. Check the show notes for links to the 810 Turbo manual and advertisement, photos of the board, and a lively discussion on AtariAge in which James has answered some questions and added even more commentary. This interview took place on June 7th, 2019.
Back in the early 80s, I was working as in computer sales, doing a little bit of programming and consulting on the side. I loved computers. There was not a lot of education at the time. There was some, but I was kind of ahead of the classes. And going to college, and the Atari 800 and 400 computers came out, and I at work had been selling Apple IIs, and I really liked this new system. I was all over the Apple games. I loved playing every one of them, Scott Adams' Adventures especially, and Zork and a lot of the other text adventures.
Sure.
Anyway,
what was
so
the
the
computer
Atari came
store?
out.
Was it like a chain or something I've never heard of?
Computer Wave. It's probably not something that you heard of, although the owner, one of the two owners, went on to start Micro D, and that became Ingram Micro D, and I actually haven't looked, but I think there's still a thing. But the computer chain died off after, I think we had 2 or 3 stores at one point, and I managed the Costa Mesa store and was doing sales down there. Started going to college. They pulled me out of there and put me in the Westminster store. It was in Westminster, California. And I loved graphics. I loved computer games or video games, and so they put me in charge of selling those. And I've been selling them for a while, and I devour manuals. I love reading, and I had found out that the Atari disk drive, which was a single density floppy controller, had 89K of storage, if I remember correctly, because they slowed down the rotational speed, so it was actually more than a standard floppy at the time. But I had read somewhere that the hardware supported double density and could store twice as much. The head was compatible, but the chipset wasn't. So, and forgive me, my memory is completely failing me on the hardware guy, but I've been a member of an Atari computer group that used to meet at Saddleback College, and so I knew a number of people that had an interest in the Atari. And one of the guys was a hardware guy, and I said, "Hey, can we actually make a daughter card and drop a double density controller in, and fit something on top of the existing chipset, and double the capacity of the drive?" And he said, "Yeah, actually, I think we could probably do that." He was an electrical engineer.
Was this Charles Hosick?
Yes, it is. Oh, God, thank you. I could not for the life of me remember his name.
I've got the manual in front of me, so I'm cheating. But
cool. Man, I haven't seen that in a long time. So Charles said, "Yeah, I think we could do that." And Tom Manos was the other guy that was kind of marketing. He was the president of the Atari Computer Group, and he said, "Well, let's just do it." We were actually sitting in a Coco's having coffee at something like 2 a.m. after the computer group meeting, just shooting the breeze. So I had that idea, and I pitched it to them, and then we went off and designed it.
Cool.
And I wrote all the firmware. It was my first exposure to really working hard. I worked my way around the clock 3 times. I would work until I couldn't work anymore and couldn't keep my eyes open, go back to bed, and wake up, grab a cup of coffee, and start coding again.
Wow.
And worked my way all the way around the clock 3 times doing that.
Had you written firmware before?
I'd done some assembly.
Okay.
Not done that much, and to be honest, there really wasn't that much code in retrospect. I think the original ROM was 2K, and at some point I saw a disassembly of it, but that was after I had actually written my version. I had the luxury of 4K, so it was a huge amount of room over the original ROM, but I also added in a lot of additional features that the original one didn't have, because I had to support single density, I had to support dual density, and supported disk copying.
Right. So you wrote the code, and Charles did the hardware, and the version I have here says the chip says version 1.2 on it. Do you know how many versions there were?
Really?
Yep.
I don't. I think what we did was we made 3 runs, and on the hardware side, I think we encased one of the versions in. I don't remember what the stuff was called, but it was some plastic. So we actually
epoxy stuff.
I think we went through a couple of minor revisions. I have no clue, or I can't remember what the differences between the versions were. I know we had one version that may not have been encased in epoxy, and we had another couple that were encased in epoxy so that nobody could see actually what we did.
The version I have, 1.2, is not encased in epoxy. I did notice, however, you scratched out all the chips, the identification information on all the chips, so that people, I guess, couldn't reverse engineer your design.
Right.
Which brings me to, do you still have the schematics for this thing?
I actually have nothing. I have none of the source code. I kind of regret this, but I don't have any of the source code. I don't have any of the circuit diagrams or anything else. I mean, I know we used a Western Digital part, but we used I think a 4K EEPROM. It might have been a PROM, but I don't think we paid to. I think we only made 300 of them, so we didn't pay to get a full non-reprogrammable part in there. It may have been a one-time program. And it was I don't remember the part number. It was a Western Digital floppy controller, and it was the double density model of the same one that the Atari had.
Mm-hmm.
So no, I'm sorry, I can't help you out.
No, it's the guy who knows more than me on the Atari forum is guessing it was a Western Digital 2793, but I don't know.
I could probably look it up if after our talk here,
if you're so inclined. So how long did it take you from, hey, let's do this project, to till it was done?
Boy, you're sure taking me back.
I mean, we're talking this period of weeks or months or longer.
It was several months. I believe it was on the order of 3 months until I had workable firmware, and there's probably another person whose name I'm not sure he wants out there. I'm not sure if he's even around. I haven't spoken to the guy in 3 decades. But a guy named Hadley Stacy in Colorado was doing a modification of the Atari OS so that it would support double density. And I think I had the first version of the firmware done, and he had a double density version of the OS. Now, actually, I don't want to tie those two together, because the firmware worked with the stock OS. And I want to say it was 3 or 4 months, may have taken 5, but that was, we're talking 1981. It was a long time ago.
Sure.
It was enough time for me to work 3 times around the clock.
Wow. Holy cow. Did you said you only made 300 of these things?
That was my recollection, that
Yeah.
where the full production run was 300.
Wow. That wouldn't surprise me because this thing is super rare now. I found this one here and I started researching it. And there's like no other pictures of them, and no one else had dumped the software or anything until I did. So it seems like there weren't that many. And also, and this is my next question for you, I believe this thing came out in 1983, which was the same year that the Atari 1050 disk drive came out. So that couldn't have been good for your sales.
I don't remember if the 1050 was double density, though.
So it said it was, but it was really enhanced density, which was about 1.5 times the density. But I don't know if most people knew the difference, really. I don't know.
Single side, no, it was compatible. Yeah, it says enhanced density. I just looked it up too.
Yeah.
I don't actually recall. I had left the company, and it was probably shortly before the 1050 came out, and that explains why we didn't sell quite all that many.
Right. Yeah, because they stopped selling the 810. So.
And it wouldn't have been compatible. It probably wouldn't have been compatible with the 1050, although I'm not certain.
Right. So this was the only product that this company came out with, I believe.
Yep.
And all right, so where'd the name come from? Who thought up the name Neanderthal?
Sorry for the long pause, but I don't quite recall. It may have been Tom Manos, probably was. Or it was a collaborative effort between him and I. I don't think Charles liked the name all that much, but he did buy into it.
Did you do any other projects for the Atari computer with any other company, or just on a personal basis?
Actually, no. I kind of got away from the personal computer scene for a while, and my next job was with a school bus contractor, and started working on IBM Mini systems, and kind of did that for a number of years, and then another position that had mini computers and PC interaction, but that was IBM PC.
Okay.
And then kind of shifted over to doing mostly PC development after that.
Mm-hmm. So were you happy with this product?
I was really proud of myself. First off, it worked. that was a big deal. I had known another engineer that worked for Computer Wave that was doing like a serial port for the Apple II, and he could never get the firmware to work quite right. And not only did the A10T work, the disk copying software did a pretty good job. It was did some nasty things to your head because it would reset the head between every track. But even still, I was proud that I could reverse engineer some of the more sophisticated disk copying and replicate the media. Now, I probably shouldn't be too proud of that. I mean, it would enable people to pirate software. But on the flip side to that, there was also no replacement policy at the time for bad media, so it would at least make you make backup copies of things.
Sure. Do you think that people use this for piracy?
I couldn't tell you.
Were you?
I really got no feedback on that.
Oh, that was my next question. Did you get any feedback from users or from, I don't know, Atari or anybody?
No, not a peep from anybody. It was, as far as I know, it was pretty quiet on that front.
It was a pretty low-profile product, I think.
It was, and we weren't the only product in the market. There were actually two other disk copying only products on the market at the time, and ours provided some real value. Not only did it double the density, I also figured out how to increase the transfer rate between the disk drive from a whopping 19.2 kilobaud up to an even astronomical 56 kilobaud, which is pretty weak by today's standards. But let's see, that was what, four times the speed was a big difference.
Wow, nice. So I was, who was your competition? I'm aware of like Happy Computer. Happy Computer had a popular duplication speed up software, hardware. Who else?
There was, and I'm not going to be able to help you out. I know there were two.
Yeah.
Happy was the biggest one. There was another guy that was doing something in one of the magazines, I think, advertising, but I don't recall the name.
Okay.
Sorry.
No, this was a long time ago. You said you left the company. Was any particular reason for that?
It was largely burnout, and that it didn't seem like we were actually going to make a lot of sales. As I said, we sold about 300 units, and I was just completely burnt out on that. I wanted to get I wouldn't say a real job, but I wanted to get a job with a larger company and just work on other things.
Sure.
So I terminated my partnership with the guys.
Did you make any money on this?
As it turned out, after I terminated the partnership, one of the guys, and it wasn't Charles, basically absconded with all of the profits from the company and didn't pay any of the bills. So Charles and I got landed with rather large injunctions against us to repay it because we weren't aware that the bill wasn't paid. And I was advised by a lawyer that my name wasn't on the subpoena, so I could safely ignore it. And as it turns out, we both got judgment liens against us. And Charles had to mortgage his house, and I was in my early 20s, and I had a nice chunk of money I had to repay, and it was very painful for quite a while.
Holy cow.
Pardon?
I said, holy cow.
Yeah, it was actually a really valuable life lesson. I mean, I learned a ton about programming. I learned a ton about optimizing code, but I also learned a ton about people, and I haven't repeated that mistake since then.
Mm-hmm. I'm sorry about that. Yikes.
Well, Charles is the guy that really he carried the brunt of it. I think I got maybe 1/3 of the judgment, and he got 2/3, or he got more than that. So he's the one I really feel sorry for, but I was in no position to help him out.
Sure. So what do you do today?
Today, I'm a software architect for Blizzard Entertainment. I work on Battle.net, and most of the work I'm doing today involves kind of wrangling a number of SDKs that Blizzard gives to the game teams and allows them to communicate with Battle.net. And my current job is kind of cleaning up some of the rough edges around that package. We've got a lot of teams that are developing code, and not everybody is using the same compiler, not everybody's using the same style, and so I'm wrangling that together, and other things. Blizzard has a lot of work to do.
Nice.
This is actually my first foray into the game industry. Like I said, I always enjoyed it kind of from the edges, and my previous positions have been in security or other types of software engineering. In this, I'm digging it though. It's a lot of challenge and a lot of good work.
Awesome, cool. Are you still in contact with any of the other guys from back in the day?
Let's see. I saw Tom Manos 10, 15 years ago. And it was quite civil. And Charles, I'd actually to be honest, I'd forgotten his name, and I have not spoken with him since I split from Neanderthal.
Okay. What haven't I asked you about that time that I should have?
I just have a little bit of an interesting story about how the software was developed. We had a daughter card, and the hardware was actually working, but I had to actually burn the EEPROM with the code for the disk drive, and we were doing this kind of on a shoestring budget. So I had one drive and one EEPROM burner, and the source codes at one point exceeded 89K. So I had to actually convert the disk to a double density disk, and I was developing on my own firmware. I had burned 2 out of the 3 EEPROMs that I had in my possession. If you touch an EEPROM without discharging the static electricity, you run a risk of actually burning the part out. I'd blown 2 of them in my carelessness, and so I was down to a single EEPROM that was running the firmware that was the only firmware on the planet that could actually read the disk drive that contained all the source code for the firmware. And that was kind of living a little dangerously. I don't think I would repeat that mistake. I love Git, which is a source control system, so I can. Okay, that's one of my most memorable anecdotes from that period. It was another really valuable lesson: is always have a backup.
Hear, hear.
Thank God I didn't burn it out.
Jeez, yeah, it would have been the end of it.
Yep.
Cool. Okay, last question, I think. If you could send a message to the Atari computer users who still exist, and you can right now, what would you tell them?
Oh man, more power to you. I love the Atari system, and that you guys still have working hardware kind of blows me away. It was a really revolutionary system before the Amiga, and just had I thought really awesome hardware behind it, and I'm really glad that you're kind of keeping that history alive. Thank you.
Awesome, good answer. Thank you. And just so you know, I mean, some of the hardware that people are creating now would blow your 1983 mind. You just hook a SD card up to your Atari, and it sees it as a stack of floppy drives of unlimited size. It's pretty good.
I haven't toyed with an Atari in ages. I mean, literally since the early '80s, and I'm sure I'd be blown away with what people have done with it today. And it was a stressful time, but it was also really, really fun and rewarding as hell to actually ship a product.
If you enjoy these interviews and would like to contribute, make a tax-deductible contribution to the Internet Archive, a nonprofit digital library that has done incredible things to preserve computer history. Make your tax-deductible contribution at archive.org/donate. Thanks.